Imagine, if you will, a man develops a cough. And I know in our current state of affairs in the world, that maybe isn't the most hardest thing to imagine. But say a man develops a cough, and he goes to his doctor. Doctor checks him for COVID and other respiratory ailments, and all of those are negative, and checks him out, says, okay, it's probably just a cold. Just go home. Just rest, get some fluids, you'll be fine. It'll clear up. Right? So the man goes home, but the cough doesn't clear up. It persists, and it gets worse. And it goes on for weeks. And it gets so bad that it keeps him up at night. It interrupts conversations that he has for anything more than a minute because he just starts coughing. The cough is so unrelenting that the man then goes back to the doctor. It didn't clear up. And so he goes back to the doctor, and the doctor runs a bunch of tests and gets some imaging done and things like that. And the doctor finds out that the most likely cause of this man's cough is cancer, lung cancer. Now imagine the doctor knows how hard this diagnosis will be for this man, how devastating it will be for the man. So rather than tell the guy, hey, look, you have lung cancer, he says, I think what you really need is this cough syrup. We'll give you this high-strength cough syrup, and that'll help. So the man gets his cough syrup, he begins taking it, and it eases the cough. It eases the cough very well, and the man's able to sleep at night. He's able to carry on conversations. The cough is really barely noticeable anymore. And, of course, the man is delighted by this. Like, it really seems like the cough syrup has solved the problem and that it's better now. But all the while, cancer is slowly eating away at his body. Now, in this scenario, which it's a fake scenario, it wouldn't happen that way. But in this scenario, as we look at it, the coughing is only a symptom. It's not really the problem. The problem is cancer. And there's a lot of times in our lives when we have symptoms that we treat without dealing with the problem causing the symptoms. We are constantly surrounded by people, and even ourselves often get into this point where we are coughing. We have something going on. We're struggling, or we're hurting, or we're stressing, or cheating, or lusting, or spending, or worrying, or quitting, or medicating, or avoiding, or searching. We have things going on in our lives that are just the symptoms of a bigger problem. And there are, as I said, there are all kinds of people that we come in contact with every day, even some coming into our church sometimes, that have these kind of symptoms. Now, pastors like myself, we have the opportunity to meet with these people on occasion to hear about these symptoms that are going on in their lives. And Pastor Kyle Eidelman, who's the pastor who put together this Gods at War series that we're going through, he writes this about the meetings that he has. He says, they come to me and share their struggles. They unload their frustrations. They express their discouragement. They display their wounds. They confess their sins. And when Pastor Kyle talks to these people, these people always point to what they believe is the central problem. This is the issue. And in their minds, they've nailed it. They know what the problem is. They can't stop coughing, right? But here's what Pastor Kyle discovered. They're talking about symptoms rather than the true illness. The true illness, which is almost always idolatry. Now, we as humans have a knack for dealing with the symptoms while ignoring the big issue, ignoring the problem, the issues causing the symptoms. And often, our issues are caused by where we are putting our faith and our trust. And that's the topic that we're dealing with today. That's what we're looking at today, and even in this series as a whole, is this thing where we put our faith into things that aren't God. We put our faith and our trust into things, we give our lives to these things, and those things become idols in our lives. They become things that steal our worship from God. And there is a war in our hearts. There's a war going on in our hearts for our time and our attention and our focus. And the idols, in so many ways, these idols that we've put in our lives, these fake gods, are at war with us and with the God of all gods. There is a war going on, and as we look through that lens, it really will become clear the gods are at war, and their strength is not something that we should underestimate or sideline or not care about. These gods that are in our lives clash for the throne of our hearts, and there's a lot at stake when we're talking about the throne of our heart. Everything about me, everything I do, every relationship I have, everything I hope or dream or wish to become depends on which God wins this war. And this makes me wonder, is it possible that every sin that we deal with, every sin that we struggle with, every discouragement that shows up in our lives, even the lack of purpose that we sometimes feel, is it possible that all of those things are something that we live with because of idolatry? And it's an interesting question, but sometimes it's easy to step back from that and say, do we really need to worry about idolatry? Because honestly, idolatry doesn't seem like a big issue in our day and age. But as author Os Guinness tells us, idolatry is the most discussed problem in the Bible and one of the most powerful spiritual and intellectual concepts in the believer's arsenal. Yet for Christians today, it is one of the least meaningful notions. Even though idolatry is one of the most discussed topics in the Bible, we give little thought to it. And one of the reasons that idolatry takes a place of little meaning is that the whole subject seems mostly obsolete. We don't know anyone who kneels down to statues or bows down before carved images. And a lot of times when we think idolatry, we think of idols, and that's what we think of. We think of these carved images or these statues or things like that. And then it makes idolatry seem so primitive and so irrelevant. And yet idolatry is still the number one issue in the Bible. And that really, like when we stop to think about that, that should mean something to us. The number one issue discussed in the Bible is idolatry. Idolatry comes into play in every book of the Bible. Every single one. More than 50 laws of the first 5 books of the Bible, the books of Moses, more than 50 of the laws listed in there have to do with this one issue. And in all of Judaism, there are only 4 sins which the death penalty was attached to, and idolatry is one of them. It's a big deal. The Bible makes it a big deal, but still, we don't always think about it. We don't think much about it at all because we don't worship statues. I mean, we don't bow ourselves down to these images. But what if idolatry is not about statues? All right? Usually, for me personally, when I think about idolatry or think about idols and the commands against idolatry, like I think of what I read in the Ten Commandments. And, it's found in Exodus chapter 20, and specifically, I think of the verses 3 through 5 there. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourselves a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. shall not bow down to them or serve them. We look at this and, it's clear. It says that we don't worship anything other than God. That's what it says. But it's easy to look at this and take this and connect the ideas of worshiping other gods and worshiping carved images into one thing, one commandment. Don't worship statues of cosmic deities with strange names. Don't do that. It's bad, right? But the gods of today are not cosmic deities with strange names. Right? What if these gods that we deal with today take identities that are so ordinary we don't even recognize them, that they are almost hidden from our eyes just by their ordinariness? What if we do our bowing and our serving with our imaginations, or with our checkbooks, or our search engines, or our calendars? What if these things that are really a part of our everyday lives are the idols that we worship? Now, most Christian traditions view this commandment as one commandment. You look through them, and this is listed as number one. No other gods before me, no carved images. Right? That they count that as one commandment. But some traditions, like the Jewish Talmud and the Orthodox Christian Church, view this actually as two separate commandments, Commandment 1 and Commandment 2. And those two separate commandments: don't worship any other God than me. Commandment 2, don't worship images. Like two separate things. And I think I think the reason that they do that is because they understand that it's quite possible to worship something that is not an image. Is it not a carved statue or a picture on a wall? It's quite possible to worship something that we don't see with our own eyes. Idolatry is the worship of anything other than God, whether it's an image or not. Idolatry is not about statues, and that means that as we look at idolatry today, in our world today, it's still the big deal that the Bible makes it out to be. And here's the thing that goes along with that, though, that we all worship something. We talked about this a little bit in Sunday school. We all worship something. In Joshua chapter 24, the Israelites, they'd gone through the Exodus, 40 years wandering in the desert, and then they entered the promised land, and they've conquered most of the promised land, and now here's Joshua giving his last speech to the Israelites. And at the end of this speech, he presents them with a choice. Now, therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your father served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your father served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Now, Joshua told them that they could either worship the Lord, or they could worship the gods that their ancestors worshiped before God called Abraham out of the land of Ur and into Canaan. Or they could worship the gods that the Egyptians served. Or they could worship the gods of the people of the land that they were inhabiting. Like he laid out these choices for them. These are your choices. But he didn't give them the option of worshiping nothing, because we all worship something. We worship something when we give it the ultimate authority and our full devotion. That is what worship is. There's always something in our life, something that is more, or sometimes more than one something, but there's always something that we give authority and devotion to. Always something. And there's actually a reason for that. When we dig into the word, we see that there's a reason that everybody worships something. Even people who claim they don't worship anything worship something. and there's a reason for that. Ecclesiastes 3:11, Solomon wrote, also, he has put eternity into man's heart. Like that, this is something that God did from the very beginning. When he created Adam and Eve, he placed a sense of eternity in us. He put eternity in our hearts. That's this idea that there's more than just this. There's more than just the things that we see and experience in our lives. There's more to the world than just what we know. There's something beyond all of that. There's eternity. And because of sin, it's easy for us to lose sight of the Creator who put that eternity in our hearts. And then instead, we focus on the things we see and the things we experience and the things we know. And when that happens, we begin to worship the things that we see and experience and know instead of the God who created all things. So and we all worship something. The question is, what are we worshiping? What are the gods at war for our heart? What are the things going on in our lives that are stealing the focus from God? And I think this is an important thing to figure out. As Peter told us, 1 Peter 5:8, be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to destroy. The devil wants to destroy us. He wants to steal us from God. He wants people's hearts to be focused on anything other than God. And if he can get us to worship something other than God, it makes us that much easier to destroy. So what are the things the devil uses to focus our worship away from God? This is a tough question, and it's honestly the answer to what are becoming the idols in our life is a very individualistic things. Because there are things that I care about, like nerdy stuff, that my son couldn't care less about, right? So, like, nerdy stuff could easily become an idol in my life. It's not something you'll ever have to deal with, you know? It's a very individual thing. So, but we need to figure it out. What are the things that are drawing our hearts away from God? And I think to figure it out, as Pastor Kyle says, he has some questions. If we ask ourselves these questions, it will give us a better understanding of the things in our lives that are trying to steal our focus from God. Now, these questions, there's not an absolute. You answer a question that with this answer, that means that is an idol. It's not an absolute thing, but these questions can help us identify the things in our lives that are becoming more important to us than God. So to figure out what these idols are, we need to ask, what are you most disappointed with? And the reason we ask that is because what we're most disappointed with often reveals what we've put our hope in. And, as I said, these questions are just guides. Sometimes, I'm driving down the street and I'm disappointed that someone is going slower than I feel they should be. But that doesn't mean that speed is an idol in my life. It might point to some other things that are an idol, like a sense of control. Like, I get to choose my speed, not the schmuck that's driving in front of me. It's that there is, what we are disappointed about often reveals what we put our hope in, and what we put our hope in becomes our God. And the next question, what do you sacrifice your time and money for? The word serve appears 7 times in Joshua's final speech. 7 times. Who or what we serve is revealed by how we spend our time and our money, and who or what we serve can easily become an idol in our lives. It can become something that is the most important thing, the things we put our time and our money to. And the last question that we're going to talk about here is, where do you go when you're hurt? And I think this is one that really, that when I was preparing this is the one that stuck out to me the most. Where do you go? Where do we go when we are hurt? Because where we go when we're hurt creates an honest moment of worship. Where do we go for comfort? And like I said, these questions are guidelines, because there are things like children, when they're hurt, they go to their parents, and that's an important thing. But then I feel like, when I'm struggling with something, my wife is my first point of contact, and that's a necessary thing, and that doesn't mean that she's an idol in my life, but it's by going through her, God can speak to me. And so it doesn't necessarily mean it's an idol, but it certainly opens a question: what are the things that we find comfort from? Sometimes, it can be food or relaxation or all these other things that, like, I'm stressed, I just need to do this. And this can easily become an idol. So where do we go when we're hurt? And asking these questions, these are 3 questions. And actually our journals here, this journal actually goes through more. And so I encourage you to get the journal if you haven't asked for one yet. But like, asking these questions helps reveal what we value. It reveals what we value, and what we value reveals where our heart is. And one of the things Jesus told us, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Our heart is with what we treasure most. And if we're putting our heart and treasuring something more than we are treasuring God, it has become an idol. And so we need to ask this question, and we need to go through these things. We need to identify the things that we are worshiping. But once we do identify them, once we've identified some things that might possibly be an idol in our life, that might possibly be one of our gods that we serve today, what do we do with them? How do we handle the gods of today that show up in our life? And I think we can return to Joshua for the answer, where he tells us in Joshua 24:15, choose this day whom you will serve. Choose this day whom you will serve. An interesting thing about this verse, the word choose there is a verb, but it's not just make this choice and be done. The verb here that's used here implies an ongoing choice, a choice that is for today. And then when tomorrow becomes today, it's a choice for then too. So kind of, what Joshua is saying here is that he chose the Lord. He is choosing the Lord, and he will always choose the Lord. That is what Joshua is saying, is that as long as it's today, he's making that choice to serve the Lord. And that is our answer for dealing with the gods that are at war for our heart, with dealing with these things that are trying to steal our worship from God. We choose this day to worship the Lord. We choose this day to give him ultimate authority and full devotion. We choose this day whom we will serve. And I'm going to Holy Spirit's talking to me here, so I'm going to take a pause. I think it's important to understand that every day this is a choice. But there are going to be days that we mess up. There are going to be days when we choose the wrong thing. But it's important to remember that God died for that sin too. And if we make the mistake one day, then we choose after that, this day, from this moment on, I serve the Lord. And that's an important thing. There is never going to be a time when our mistakes condemn us to the point that God can't save us. Never going to be the point. And so we continue to choose this day. But then, how do we do that? I'm a practical person. I like steps. I'm the type of person that when I buy something, I almost always pull out the instructions first. I know it's a little weird for a guy to do that, but that's the type of person I am. I look at the instructions. I like having a plan. And so, but how do we do this? How do we choose this day? Because it is actually, it's one thing to say, I choose God this day, but it's another thing to actually do it. And it's a totally another thing to actually get our heart to follow where our brain has made the decision to go. And so how do we get our heart to follow? And I think, once again, I think Joshua actually gives us the answer. In all of Joshua chapter 24, I think the first part in choosing this day, choosing to serve the Lord, is to choose to appreciate what God has done. And if you look at Joshua chapter 4, you'll see that the first 13 verses of it recount the incredible things that God has done for his people. Starting with Abraham being called out of the land of Ur, all the way to where the Israelites were at that point when they had taken most of the promised land. It recounts all that God has done. And Joshua is using that to refocus the hearts of the people on what God has done so they can appreciate what God has done. Choosing this day means that we choose to appreciate God and what he has already done in our lives. And we choose to thank God for the works of his hand. As Psalms 126:3 says, the Lord has done great things for us. We are glad. We choose to appreciate God. The second part of choosing this day is to choose to recognize who God is. In Joshua 24:19 and 20, Joshua reminds Israel that if they serve other gods, God will turn from them. That God will no longer do the things that he did, that Joshua told them he did in the first 13 verses of his speech. That he will turn from it. And this is the sentiment backed up in other places in Scripture, like Isaiah 42:8, where it says, I am the Lord. That is my name. My glory I will give to no other, nor my praise to carved idols. We serve a God who is above all things, and he's not going to lower himself to allow us to give his glory to something else. God will not allow his glory to go to false gods, even if those false gods are the attitudes and actions that we place above him, oftentimes without even realizing we're doing it. He is God. He is above all things, the creator of all things, and we must recognize that. And that thing that we're disappointed with, or the thing that we put our hope in, he's above that. That thing that we give our time or our money to, the things that we serve, he's above all of those too. Whatever it is we go to when we're hurting, whatever it is that brings us comfort, God is above that as well. There is nothing above God. He is the creator and sustainer of all things. Choosing this day means that we choose to recognize God as the rightful authority over all things. I think the third part of choosing this day is to smash all of your other gods, to get rid of them. Joshua 24:23 says, he said to them, then put away the foreign gods that are among you and incline your heart to the Lord, the God of Israel. Now, interesting here, the word put away, it literally means to turn off. But this was written in a time before electronics and things. Before there was ever a thing that had a switch on it that you would turn from on to off. And so, like for us, when we think turn off, that's what, like, no more power, hit the power button, it's done. But for them, for Joshua and the Israelites at that time, the turn off meant like going down a road and turning off of it. It was a turning away from. The word put away here literally means to turn away from. And Joshua is literally telling the people to turn away from their fake gods. Literally, it's interesting. Like I was writing this. I have this program I use called Grammarly, which helps me check my spelling and my grammar. So I didn't do very good in English. I need help, right? And so but Grammarly hates it when I type the word literally, because it's like, do you really mean literally? And I had to tell it more than once this week. Yes, I really mean literally. Joshua is literally telling us to turn away from the fake gods. Going this way towards them, and we turn away. To get rid of them, to put them out of our sight, and to turn our hearts towards God. That is what Joshua tells us there. To put God in his rightful place over all other things. And in terms of the things that we put above God in our lives, he's telling us to turn away from the authority that we've given them, to turn away from the devotion that we've given them, and to take that authority and devotion and put it back on God where it belongs, to take that thing that we've made an idol and put it under God's authority, rather than allowing it to have its own authority. Joshua is telling us to put our authority and devotion back on God and allow him to dictate how we participate or use the things that are in our lives. Allow God to direct us in the things that we're doing. That is what Joshua is telling us here. To choose this day means that we need to make the choice that God is God and all other parts of our lives are subject to him. We need to choose this day to worship God instead of the other things in our lives. We need to choose this day to get rid of the things that take our devotion away from him. That's how we treat the problem the problems that show up in our lives, rather than just treating the symptoms that our sin is causing. Now, if you've been taking the cough syrup to treat the struggles and discouragements and the issues that you have, it's time to deal with the real problem. Where is your heart? Choose this day that the Lord alone will sit on the throne of your life. Choose this day to serve the Lord. That's where we are.
Hello, I'm Rich England, the pastor here at River of Life Community Fellowship, and I want to thank you for joining us for our online service today. Here at River of Life, we hope and pray that you've been blessed and encouraged by what God had to say today. If you'd like to know more about our church, we invite you to find us online at www.rolfellowship.com or on social media. We're on both Facebook and Instagram. Just search at ROL Fellowship. Thank you, and God bless.